There's been a lot of talk about what we didn't hear yesterday.
Sure.
There weren't a lot of details. Tell us what we did hear. What did you take comfort from?
I think you take comfort from seeing an administration that is stepping up to the plate and engaging and working towards getting pro-growth tax reform. I think that for the last 8 years, that's been woefully absent, and I think we're delighted between the regulatory, the EO last week on regulations saying we want to ease the business community's burden under tax regulations, combined with the White House stepping out yesterday, laying out pro-growth principles, saying we want to work with the Hill and the House and the Senate. I mean, that's a huge positive.
So we certainly know that President Trump more or less meant what he said on the campaign trail, because a lot of what was in there were things that he talked about before. So he's following through, at least to that degree.
Correct.
What comes next to actually put meat on the bones, as it were?
Sure, I think he's going to have to have conversations with, Chairman Brady in the House, Chairman Hatch in the Senate, with leadership, with Speaker Ryan, with Leader McConnell, and kind of parse out what they want to do and how we can have the most pro-growth tax code. I mean, that's certainly our objective. We want to see the most pro-growth policies out there possible.
Well, no question that the president and all of his deputies are talking about growth. That's there, which is Mick Mulvaney or it's Secretary Mnuchin, whoever it is. It's all about growth. There is this thing called the deficit on the other side.
Absolutely.
And there are people in Washington, particularly up on Capitol Hill, who are concerned about the deficit. Where does the chamber come down on that balance between running up a bigger deficit and really getting growth going?
Sure, I think we're going to have to see we're going to have to let the congressional scorekeepers, the folks like the JCT, the CBO, the OMB.
That's the Joint Commission.
Joint Committee on Taxation.
Yes,
kind of the scorekeepers of the tax reform Olympics, let's say. We're going to have to let them determine, how much growth is this going to drive and what's the revenue impact's going to be. And, let them work out with the Hill how to make the math work. I mean, our focus is growth, and getting there in a fiscally responsible manner. So we're going to, let that process play out and be part of it.
One of the issues to come up, and actually it's one of the more read stories on the Bloomberg today, is short-term, long-term. Because as you know better than I, the mechanics of the Congress make it easier to get through a short-term tax change than a long-term one. Long-term has to be revenue neutral, which is tougher.
So
how does that stack up for your membership?
I think we're going to dream big right now. We're going to keep dreaming big, and we want permanent. I mean, businesses, I said this last time I was here, businesses want certainty. They want permanence. Businesses also need time to change how they operate, to respond to changes in the tax code, which is why I talked about transition rules last time. But I mean, I think permanency is the thing that's going to drive the most amount of growth, and that's what we're looking for, that permanency.
Yeah, and I don't want you to negotiate with yourself here, but is permanency so important, do you believe, to the business community, that if they were forced to change the choice, they would rather have something permanent they knew was reliable, they knew how to invest, and give up some of the goodies on the way?
I mean, I think that's part of the negotiation process. I'm not going to negotiate with myself, David. Sorry.
Didn't think you would.
But no, but I think permanency, this is the start of the conversation. So right now, let's ask for everything. Let's try and figure out what the most pro-growth thing is. And if we have to make changes along the way to get it across the finish line, of course, that's part of the process.
And to get it across the finish line, you know Washington well. Is the bigger problem the Democrats, or is the bigger problem some of the more fiscally conservative Republicans for the president to get done what he wants to get done?
I mean, I think everybody's got to come to the table. I said this last time. This has got to be a group effort. So I don't think there's anybody who's a bigger problem or a smaller problem. I think everybody does believe, fortunately, at a high level, that tax reform is something that can be good for this country. And I hope that sort of unity and willingness to work together continues.
Are businesses willing to take the hit on the so-called loopholes or deductions that they apparently would have to take, because it's talked about in the plan, in order to get the reduction in rates that's being offered?
I think if you have a reduction in rates, then you're willing to come to the table and talk about that. Also, if we had a more internationally competitive system, an ability to tap into that cash overseas that's locked out, the business community is going to have to decide. Our members are going to have to decide what trade-offs they're willing to make, and that's part of this process.
I'm so glad you raised the international issue, because there is a proposal for a one-time sort of, I would call it amnesty, 10% tax to bring all that cash back that's sitting overseas. What happens after that? Okay, let's hope that happens and we bring all that cash back. Then what happens to taxation after that? How do you avoid, for example, the inversion issue?
So I think we have to shift to a territorial system, which is something we heard the Trump White House talk about yesterday. We're very encouraged by that. That's actually something that was different than the Trump campaign plan. So if you have a territorial system, you're not subjecting cash to that extra layer of tax when you bring it back to the United States, and it frees that capital up going forward, and we think that's very positive.